The Deadly Inheritance Game. It was a cold and stormy night. The richest and most mysterious man in the city, Alexander Hart, sat alone in the grand library of his mansion. In front of him was a chessboard, but strangely, he wasn't playing against anyone. Still, he slowly moved the king piece forward, smiled faintly, and whispered, "The game finally begins." He placed a sealed envelope on the table. A few minutes later, Alexander Hart was found dead in his chair. The police ruled it a natural death, but they didn't know that the envelope on his desk contained a secret that would soon change several lives forever. The next day, in a small cafe across the city, a young man was washing dishes. His name was Rehan. Rehan lived a simple life. He worked long hours and lived with his mother in a tiny house. Life had never been easy for him. Suddenly, a long black car stopped outside the cafe. A serious-looking man stepped out and walked straight toward. "Are you Rehan?" the man asked. "Yes," Rehan replied, confused. The man adjusted his glasses and said, "My name is Mr. Howard. I'm the lawyer of Alexander Hart." Rehan froze. Then the lawyer said something that sounded impossible. "I believe your life is about to change because Alexander Hart has left his entire fortune to you." Rehan thought it was some kind of joke, but a few hours later, he found himself sitting in that same black car, driving along a long forest road. After some time, the car stopped in front of a massive iron gate. On the gate were golden letters, Hart Estate. Rehan stepped out of the car. In front of him stood a gigantic mansion, old, silent, and strangely unsettling. It felt as if the windows of the mansion were watching him. Inside the mansion was a huge hall. 4 people were already standing there. They were Alexander Hart's grandchildren: Daniel, quiet but extremely intelligent; Lucas, aggressive and short-tempered; Ella, mysterious and observant; Mark, clever and manipulative. All of them stared at Rehan with hostility. Lucas smirked and said, "So, this is the boy who stole our inheritance." At that moment, Mr. Howard took out an old envelope. It was Alexander Hart's will. He began to read, "If this will is being read, it means my game has begun." The entire hall fell silent. Then he continued, "My entire fortune will go to Rehan, but only on one condition." Everyone leaned forward. "He must live in this mansion for 1 year and solve all the puzzles and secrets I have left behind." Rehan asked quietly, "And if I fail?" The lawyer replied, "Then the entire fortune returns to the family." The grandchildren exchanged subtle smiles. In their minds, the outcome was obvious. This poor outsider would never survive Alexander Hart's twisted game. That night, Rehan was given a room in an old wing of the mansion. The room felt strange. Old paintings hung on the walls. The air smelled like dust and forgotten memories. Around midnight, Rehan heard a ticking sound. Tick, tick, tick. It was coming from an old clock on the wall. When he opened the clock, he found a small folded piece of paper hidden inside. It read, "If you want the truth, look behind the walls." Rehan immediately realized this was the first clue. He quietly left his room and walked toward the mansion's massive library. The library was enormous. Thousands of books filled the shelves. As Rehan ran his hand across the walls, he noticed something strange. One section of the wall sounded hollow. He pressed against it. Slowly, the wall began to move. Behind it was a hidden tunnel. The tunnel was dark and cold, as if it had been untouched for years. Rehan stepped inside carefully. Old photographs lined the walls. One photo caught his attention. In it, Alexander Hart stood beside several men. Under the photograph were the words, "The Game Masters." Rehan was trying to understand what it meant when suddenly a loud scream echoed from upstairs. Rehan ran out of the tunnel and rushed back to the hall. What he saw froze him in place. Daniel was lying on the floor, injured. Blood was dripping from his arm. And on the wall, written in blood, were the chilling words, "The game has begun." Immediately, Lucas grabbed Rehan by the collar. "You did this!"
but Ella stepped closer to the wall, studying the writing. Then she whispered something unsettling. "No, this is grandfather's style." Everyone went silent. If Alexander Hart designed this game, then someone inside the mansion was now playing it for real. But who? Rehan returned to the hidden tunnel, determined to find answers. At the end of the tunnel, he found a door. It was an old room that had reportedly been locked for 30 years. Inside was a small video player. Rehan pressed play. Alexander Hart appeared on the screen. He smiled calmly. "If you have reached this room, then you are smarter than the rest." Rehan leaned closer. Then Alexander said something that made his blood run cold. "But remember, there is also a killer in this game." The screen suddenly went black. At the same moment, the door behind Rehan slammed shut. Footsteps echoed in the darkness. Someone stepped forward slowly. It was Mr. Howard, the lawyer. He smiled coldly. "You've come very far, Rehan, but this game was never meant for you to win." It turned out the lawyer had been manipulating everything. His plan was simple: create chaos, eliminate the heirs, and eventually control the fortune himself. But there was something he didn't realize. Alexander Hart had predicted his betrayal too. Suddenly, a hidden door opened. Security guards rushed in. Mr. Howard was arrested. Everyone thought the nightmare was finally over. But later that night, Rehan found another envelope in his room. The same envelope Alexander Hart had placed on his desk before dying. Inside was a single message: "If you are reading this, you have won the first game." Below the message was a map, and beneath the map were the words, "The real treasure is still hidden." Just then, one of the mansion's walls slowly began to open again, and Rehan realized something terrifying. The game was far from over.
Rehan had just discovered the envelope and the mysterious map in his room. He studied it carefully. Strange symbols and pathways led to different parts of the mansion. A note at the bottom read, "The real treasure is still hidden. Solve the puzzles or lose everything." His heart raced. He knew Alexander Hart's games were never simple. Rehan carefully pocketed the map and quietly left the room, making sure not to wake the heirs. The grand puzzle begins. In the main hall, Daniel and Lucas were recovering from the chaos of the previous night. Ella approached Rehan cautiously. "You need help. You can't do this alone," she whispered. Rehan nodded. He wasn't sure if he could fully trust her, but he had no choice. Together, they began following the map. Hidden doors, secret staircases, and dark hallways stretched before them. The old portraits seemed to be watching every step. The mechanical room. One path led them to a locked, dusty room filled with strange machines, gears, and levers. The air smelled of oil and rust. In the center stood a large safe with intricate symbols matching the patterns on the map. Rehan and Ella worked together to solve the mechanical puzzle. After tense minutes, the gears clicked. The safe slowly opened, revealing a set of keys and an ancient book. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed behind them. Lucas appeared, furious. "You're not supposed to open this," he shouted. A chase began through the narrow corridors, shadows flickering as lightning lit the walls. The Library of Secrets. They ran into the mansion's secret library. Thousands of old books lined the walls. Dust hung thick in the air. Rehan flipped through the ancient book, discovering it was Alexander Hart's diary. It revealed hidden passageways, secret rooms, and coded messages left to test his heirs. While decoding the first message, a hidden door slowly opened, revealing a tunnel with glowing symbols. The diary warned, "Only the clever survive. Follow the symbols or risk everything." First encounter with the killer. Rehan and Ella cautiously walked down the tunnel. They could hear faint whispers and footsteps behind them. Suddenly, a shadow appeared, holding a knife. It was Mr. Howard. "I warned you, Rehan. This game was never meant for you," he hissed. A tense fight began. Rehan barely dodged and knocked over a candle, lighting up symbols along the tunnel walls. Howard retreated,
silently vowing, "You haven't seen the last of me." Chamber of Mirrors. Following the clues, Rehan and Ella entered a massive hall filled with mirrors. The reflections created illusions. They could barely tell which way was real. They had to solve a reflection puzzle to reveal the correct door. Time was running out, and Howard's footsteps could be heard behind them. Finally, Rehan pressed the correct mirrors in sequence, revealing a spiral staircase leading downward into darkness. Test of loyalty. At the bottom, a large underground room awaited them. Inside were two paths, one marked truth and the other deception. Ella hesitated. Which one do we take? Hart designed these games to test trust. They decided to split up. Rehan took the truth path. Ella chose deception, promising to meet at the next checkpoint. Rehan's path led him to a room filled with clocks, each ticking differently. He had to arrange them in order of Hart's birthday to reveal a hidden door, the deadly trap. As Rehan solved the clock puzzle, the floor beneath him shifted. Spikes emerged from the walls. He barely jumped to safety. A voice echoed, "Only the worthy inherit. Fail, and you join the forgotten." At the end of the trap room, he found a chest containing another map and a golden key engraved with AH, Alexander Hart's personal key. Reunion and betrayal. Rehan and Ella reunited at a secret hall revealed by the key, but Lucas appeared, furious, holding a gun. "I won't let you take this fortune." Hence standoff ensued. Rehan used shadows and mirrors from Hart's illusions to confuse Lucas. Ella knocked the gun away, barely escaped. Now it was clear. The game had turned deadly. The hidden vault. The final map led them to a massive vault hidden behind a waterfall inside the mansion grounds. Symbols and puzzles covered the walls. Rehan had to combine all clues from the diary, maps, and letters to unlock it. After tense moments, the vault clicked open. Inside lay gold, documents, and a small chest labeled for the true heir. Inside was a letter. "You've proven your intelligence, courage, and loyalty. But remember, final test awaits." Rehan realized Hart's games were far from over. Treasure was only a step. Next, the true mastermind would reveal themselves. The mastermind revealed. As they celebrated, shadows moved. Mr. Howard, who had escaped capture, watched Rehan from a secret passage. He whispered, "Congratulations, but the real inheritance is mine. The game has just begun." Lightning struck the mansion as Rehan looked out the window, realizing Hart's legacy was more than money. It was a deadly series of tests and traps designed to consume anyone who dared enter. The screen fades to black with text, "To be continued." It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The entire mansion was covered in darkness. Only the sound of rain hitting the windows could be heard. Rehan stood alone inside the grand library. In his hand was the letter he had found inside the treasure chest. The letter contained only one sentence: "You have passed the first stage, but the real game has just begun." A strange feeling of unease filled Rehan's chest. Suddenly, the large clock inside the library began to ring. Dong, dong, dong. 12 times. And as the final echo faded, something unexpected happened. One of the walls of the library slowly began to move. Hidden door was opening. Rehan picked up a flashlight and stepped inside the secret passage. Tunnel looked ancient. Dust covered the wall. Old portraits hung along the corridor, but one painting caught Rehan's attention. In the picture, Alexander Hart was standing beside an unknown man. Below the painting were the words "creator of the game." Rehan froze. That meant one terrifying thing. Alexander Hart had not created the game alone. At the end of the tunnel stood a metal door. Written on it were the words, "Only the worthy may enter." Rehan slowly pushed the door open. The moment he stepped inside, the floor beneath him suddenly collapsed. Below him were sharp metal spikes. Rehan quickly grabbed the wall, barely managed to hold himself up. Suddenly, a screen turned on. Alexander Hart appeared on it. He was smiling smiling calmly. Then he said, "If you have reached this room, you truly deserve to play the game." In the center of the room stood a small table. On the table were 3 keys, and beside them a message. "Only one key will lead you alive out." Rehan carefully looked around the room. Then he noticed a strange symbol carved into the wall. It was the same symbol he had seen on the map before. One of the keys had the same symbol. Rehan slowly picked up that key. He inserted it into the lock. Door opened. He had chosen correct. The moment Rehan stepped out of the room, a voice suddenly echoed behind. "Impressive." Rehan turned around. It was Lucas, and he was holding a gun. Lucas laughed. "You solved all the puzzles for me. Now the treasure will be mine." Lucas forced Rehan to open the final door. The door slowly creaked open. They stepped inside a massive hall. In the center of the hall stood a large chest. Lucas rushed toward it and opened it. There was no gold inside. Instead, there was a video screen. The screen suddenly turned on. Alexander Hart appeared once again. Hart looked directly at them. Then he said, "This game was never about money. It was about character. It was about proving who could resist greed." Then he turned his eyes toward Luke. "And you failed." At that exact moment, sirens began echoing throughout the hall. Police lights flashed outside the man. The entire game had been secretly recorded. Lucas was arrested. A few days later, Rehan had officially become the new owner of the Hart Mansion. That night, he sat alone inside the library. Everything was silent. Suddenly, the large clock began ringing again. Dong, dong, dong. Rehan slowly turned around. On the table, there was a new envelope. He was sure it had not been there before. Written on it were the words, "For Rehan." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed Alexander Hart, but something about it was strange. He did not look dead. On the back of the photograph were the words, "The real game begins when the player believes it is over." That moment, footsteps echoed from the darkness of the library. Rehan slowly stood up. "Who's there?" he asked. A voice answered from the shadows. "Welcome to Phase 2. Then a figure slowly stepped into the light. Rehan's eyes widened in shock because the man standing there, Alexander Hart,